Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host, and we are back with another interview. This one is a really interesting conversation about the future of plastics recycling. We're going to be talking with Sarah Dearman, who's the Vice President of Circular Ventures at the Recycling Partnership. Now, the Recycling Partnership is one of the most dynamic and important nonprofits working to introduce a circular economy in the United States. It was established in 2014 and works with communities and business to create solutions for, amongst other things, recycling plastic and plastic films, as well as developing local recycling and consumer education programs to increase recovery rates. In May, the Recycling Partnership announced a free, open sourced digital tool. In other words, it's something that allows you to share a lot of data. It's called PlasticIQ, and it's designed to help companies that use plastic packaging to develop waste reduction strategies and put them into practice. It also helps to quantify the carbon emissions created by the use of plastic packaging. And that's information that's desperately needed to allow consumers to understand the consequences of their shopping choices. Walmart, Colgate-Palmolive, Johnson & Johnson, Unilever, Nestle, and other major consumer packaged good companies are getting ready to use PlasticIQ. Now, you can learn more about the Recycling Partnership and PlasticIQ at www.recyclingpartnership.org. Recycling Partnership is one word, no period or dash. Welcome to the show, Sarah. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Mitch. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. First, could you tell us how the Recycling Partnership came to be and what is the mission of the organization?
Absolutely. Happy to do that. So the Recycling Partnership has been around for about half a dozen years now and came together as a unique collaboration with multiple organizations and companies coming to the table and saying, we really want to step up and do something to help change the future of recycling in the United States. One of the things that was really unique about the partnership from the beginning is we had multiple materials around the table, and that had not always been the case in the past. Oftentimes plastics worked with plastics and fiber stuck with fiber. And that's one of the things that we're really proud of at the partnership is that we work with all materials because we know that certainly the system depends on all materials, and the better we make it for each of the materials, then the better it will be. So that was about half a dozen years ago. Since then, we've just continued to grow and also to expand. So the Recycling Partnership started in the early days of really focusing on increasing access to recycling by providing grants to communities to give their residents new recycling carts. So if a community doesn't have recycling today, then we would provide them a grant. We still will provide a grant to help them bring recycling to their residents. Or perhaps they have small bins and want to move to recycling carts, then they can get a grant for that as well. A couple of other things that have continued to grow with the partnership is then we realized that we really need to help communities make their systems work better as well. So we now have a variety of toolkits and information and resources on our website that help communities with education and really optimization. So how to reach their residents and how to get their residents to participate better. And then over the last couple of years, we've expanded further to increase our role upstream. So thinking about the material that's coming into the system and what's happening to it afterwards, knowing that that's really important for a healthy system. And to focus on policy as well, seeing that as a catalyst to make everything work better sooner, then that's another area that we focus.
I want to talk about policy in a bit, but first, you've been involved in two of the what appear to be signature projects, which is the U.S. Plastics Pact and Pathway to Circularity. And these have set the stage for the PlasticIQ project from what I'm reading. What is the Plastics Pact and what are the goals of that pact and the Pathway to Circularity?
Sure. So when I joined the partnership more than 2 years ago now, I had actually been on the partnership's board of directors. So I was with one of our funding partners and eventually had the opportunity to follow my passion to the organization. And my role at the partnership is really to identify areas that we need to be in to help accelerate the circular economy. So where are there gaps in the industry that could make the circular economy advance faster. So I started out first by getting our policy arm going, which is now off and running and has a strong team. One of my next projects was to launch the U.S. Plastics Pact, and the Recycling Partnership remains on the steering committee of the Pact. The Pact, we worked with the WWF as well as Ellen MacArthur Foundation to start a pact as part of their global network of pacts. And we really did it with a couple of things in mind. So we really need a national strategy in the U.S. to address plastics. And that is something that the U.S. Plastics Pact is very well poised to do. So we started out by setting a series of targets that we would work toward collectively, both with companies as well as with governments. And actually, just recently, the Pact has now launched a roadmap which helps to break down the steps and the initiatives that will be required in order to meet those bold targets. So that's one of the things I'm really excited about with that initiative, is not only setting this national strategy, building the roadmap on how to reach it, and bringing companies to the table and then holding them accountable to ensure that they're part of the solution.
Yeah, so how do you see the impact of the Biden administration on policy, and does the Pact feel that we're in a better place than we were previous to 2020?
Well, I think anyone who has been engaged in the industry for years could look around and say that the policy environment in this space is definitely different than it's been, at least in my career. I've been working in this space for quite a while now, and I have never seen as such of a ripe environment. And no doubt some of that is due to the administration change. And though I would say that I have seen an enormous shift in businesses over the last couple of years as well, in conversations that could not be had 3 years ago around anything from producer responsibility to bottle deposits. Now you hear companies stepping up and voluntarily seeking and encouraging some of these types of interventions. That is just such an enormous change. And it's what leaves me, at least personally, optimistic that we are going to see a major shift in policy and a solution for our country in the future.
So does that accelerate the pathway to circularity?
Absolutely. So we, at the Recycling Partnership, we just recently did a study, a report. I would encourage you to look at it, called Paying It Forward, where our expert team really broke down and said, what is it going to take in order to achieve the level of circularity and a strong recycling system to support it that we need? And what we found is that it's going to take $17 billion over 5 years that needs to be invested in order to achieve some of this progress that we're looking for. $17 billion. So that's what it'll take to get equitable recycling to every household, to build the material recovery facilities to process that material, to get the education to the residents that they need so that they can participate effectively. And as generous as some of our funders are, the reality of reaching 17 billion through voluntary contributions is really hard to imagine. So that's what leads me to believe that policy is really going to be necessary to get the level of investment in our system that we need.
So let's talk about PlasticIQ. It's a software package basically that helps a company analyze its own plastics life cycle. Who's going to use it, and what kind of data will it generate to help businesses understand the environmental consequences of their plastic use and how to increase recycling rates?
PlasticIQ is a really exciting project that we've had the pleasure to work on for about the last year. So I shared with you that I used to be with a company, and at that time, I worked across the company to try to improve the sustainability of our packaging. And what I experienced is it's oftentimes really challenging to know where should you focus your resources. Should you focus on moving to another material? Should you increase recycled content? Should you be focusing on redesigning your package for it to be recyclable? It's hard to figure out where to focus and what the impact of those are going to be long-term on your footprint as well as the system. That is what PlasticIQ is able to do for companies through this free digital platform. So I would say that PlasticIQ is applicable for companies of any size, anywhere that they are on their sustainability journey. If they're just starting out, then they're able to enter in their basic plastic packaging footprint data, and then go through a series of steps to see how would their footprint be impacted if they increase reuse, if they increase recyclability. What is the economic as well as environmental benefits or potentially trade-offs from some of those solutions? And then at the end, they're able to see, based on that strategy, how they're performing against industry best practices. So that helps them understand if maybe they need to go back and look at their strategy again and see some places that they could amplify their efforts. It also will provide some guidance on some other areas to focus. And ultimately, companies who do set the strategy will be able to get recognition for their willingness to be part of the solution. So as they commit to taking action by setting targets, whether those are existing targets or new targets, then they will be recognized for those. So making this kind of information available and free for anyone to use is one of the things that makes me really excited and really thankful to work for a nonprofit organization. And I should note that we're able to make it free thanks to a grant from Walmart. That's really what helps pay for us as well as our partner Systemic to develop this tool and make it available for everyone for free.
Now, you mentioned industry benchmarks. Does entering data into the system also contribute to generating those benchmarks in any way? Is this a way basically for all of us to share so much information that we can raise the level of insight into the economy?
That is definitely part of our ambition. So there's two different ways that you can engage with PlasticIQ. One we call the light version, in which no data is saved, because we know that some companies have really strict permissions and they wouldn't allow their staff to use it otherwise. What our preference would be is that companies use the pro version, which is also free, but what it enables them to do is save their data. So that means they can come back and revisit it as things change. They can see how they're making progress against their targets. There's also an option then at the end of it, when they save their strategy, to share their strategy with us. I'll note, of course, we will never be going into any of the individual strategies that would never be released externally. It's only to aggregate that data so that, yes, we can start to continue to improve these industry benchmarks. We can also show the progress of the industry. Today, it's hard to know what's happening where, and that will really help us start to show that progress.
So do you also imagine that PlasticIQ will generate information that might be accessible to consumers in some way, maybe even on packaging, so that they can have a better understanding of the life cycle of the products and the packaging that they're buying?
Well, I think the PlasticIQ platform definitely has a lot of opportunities. We are in the process right now of laying out a lot of those different options and determining where it's going to go in the future. I do think that in general, this point that you're raising about consumers wanting more information and the ability and the need to empower consumers with that information is an opportunity and something that we need to figure out as we continue to go into the future.
That's good to hear. I think one of the challenges that everybody has is that plastic has become so ubiquitous in our lives that it's assumed you can't get rid of it. And I often reflect on how far we have come since 1967, when in The Graduate, Benjamin Braddock gets pulled aside and he gets one word of career advice: plastic. And we are making 1,000% more plastic, we were by 2015 than at that time. And we expect this to quadruple again by 2040. So I want to ask you a few questions about the partnership's perception of where we can go with plastic. Is is the point really to make this entirely circular and decrease plastic use, or is plastic here to stay at the level that we currently use it today? Do you have a sense of where we're going?
Well, I can certainly tell you what I would like to see.
Okay.
Is, first of all, we do have to use less plastic. We have to use less material, period, not just plastic, all material. What we're using today is not sustainable and is not only leading to the waste challenge that we're facing, whether it's in our landfills or in our waterways, but it's also contributing to climate change. So we have to use less material through reuse, through new delivery models, through recycled content, et cetera. So that would be the first goal I would recommend for any company, is to look and see how you can use less material. After that, I do personally think that there is some value in plastic. If you look at it, there are some clear benefits from, depending on the material and its application. It certainly has a lightweight material. There's a lot of unique properties about it. It can have a lower carbon footprint depending on what material you're comparing it to. So I don't think plastic itself is inherently bad. A couple of things that I would really like to see: we do need to really focus on the types of plastics that we use. For many years, we've been making them more complex and more different to meet different needs. We actually need to simplify that. In order for our recycling system to handle it, we need our plastics landscape to be less complex, and we really need to start focusing on using those plastics that can be recycled and that are at least have a path to get the infrastructure in the U.S. that we need to recycle them. So that's something that I would really like to see, is not only for us to use less, but to focus on using the plastics that are recyclable, so that over time, what plastics remain in the system, we can capture them and recycle them, and they can go back into a circular system.
So do you foresee bioplastics becoming more prevalent as part of that, or does that contribute to the incredible complexity of plastic categorization? Because, as we know, plastic number 7 is just a catch-all for everything that was invented after we came up with a numbering system, as far as I can tell. Where are we going in terms of the mix between petroleum-based plastic and bioplastic, do you believe?
Well, it really depends on what type of bioplastic you're talking about. So there are some plastics that are at least partially plant-based that I would call a drop-in solution. So they may be exactly like petroleum-based plastic, and therefore completely compatible with a recycling system. So there are some solutions like that, which I find really interesting because they can have a lower carbon footprint, and now we are using more renewable resources to make that material instead. So I think that type of plastic is really interesting, as long as it is following industry guidelines to ensure that they're following all of the guidance about safely using that material. There's another sector of bioplastics that I would look at, really looking at compostable plastics. And of course, today in the U.S., we seriously lack composting infrastructure. It even has further to go than recycling infrastructure. So I think it would be well into the future, but we could see a place where compostable plastics could be used for things like spaces where it's very heavily contaminated with food, and it would make sense for the material, for that item to go directly in with composting. So I could see an application like that in the future. We do have to be careful that items that are going into recycling, if they are compostable or biodegradable, then they can contaminate the system. So I think what you're hearing me say, to sum it up, it is complex. We need to look at how it's being used and what its end of life is. We don't want to see compostable or biodegradable plastics entering into the recycling system, but perhaps in the future, there's a few unique use cases that will make sense.
Now, we have, as a society, not done a very good job of recycling plastics. Since 91% of it that's ever been made is basically trash or polluting waterways. Do you believe that plastic recycling is that the advice that Mr. McGuire would have given Ben Braddock today? Or is the development of a circular economy in plastic something where we need to be thinking also about mining all that old hydrocarbon sitting underground and reusing it too? I guess what I'm asking is, are we going to continue to drill for oil in order to make plastic, or are we going to be able to start to reuse all the material we already have?
Well, I think in order for us to get to a place where it would really make sense, the price of using and making new plastic is going to have to be higher, as well as the cost to throw it away. As long as it is more expensive to recycle and oftentimes more expensive to use recycled content, it's always going to be a hard case for businesses and communities to make. So that's another place where I see policy being able to have a solution. And I think it's interesting, right? If we look at, and the cost of, these materials significantly went up, that's when we probably would see people starting to mine landfills and get that material back.
So that brings up extended producer responsibility and the idea of starting to put some form of cost or attach a form of cost to throwing away plastic. What is the Recycling Partnership's position in terms of the implementation of extended producer responsibility? Should it be legally required, or is this something that would be better to do voluntarily?
Well, as we talked about earlier, the system needs an incredible amount of investment, and it's something that our organization, many companies have been working on for a long time, and the reality is we still have a long way to go. So we need to do something differently. I do see policy as playing that role. We do believe public-private partnership is going to be key in order for this to happen, and at least some shared responsibility, so some level of producer responsibility does need to be considered as part of the solution. So everyone who is part of the system does need to be paying their fair share in order to make sure that that material comes back, and then they're able to use it and able to get that recycled content that they would like to see and meet their goals.
Do you see consumers having to change their attitude about recycling? One of the things we hear a lot is, and there are surveys that show this as well, that Gen Z and millennials, for instance, 90% of them think that brands are entirely responsible for the plastic pollution and all pollution that they are associated with their products. But the circular economy doesn't work if everybody isn't participating. Do we need to incent consumers, put a price on things so that they can get money back for returning the materials in order to drive a change in participation?
I anticipate there will be a variety of ways that we meet these goals. So certainly if we look at systems that do have incentives, then we can see higher recovery rates. So it's definitely something that we should continue to look at and explore. Now, I personally choose to believe that I'm optimistic, and a lot of our research shows as well that people want to be part of the solution. We have to make it really easy for them, not only to access, but really easy to understand. And to do that, we need a significant investment, not only in that infrastructure so that they can access it, but also the education. Our community systems are so underfunded, they're not able to give people the amount of education that they need to know how to recycle properly. So that's one of the things where we really need more investment so that we can educate people. And I do believe that with that proper education, then we will see a significant improvement.
So our listeners want to get involved. How can they influence their communities, and are there resources that the Recycling Partnership provides that they could use to exert that influence?
Yeah, definitely a few ways that I think of that individuals can get involved. So certainly if you don't have access to recycling where you live, then reach out to your elected officials and your community leaders and let them know that that's important to you, because that's oftentimes what will inspire the change. The same when it comes to effective policy solutions, reaching out to your elected officials, whether it's at the local level or the national level, and letting them know that that's important to you. Again, you're the one who votes them into office, so that's the ones that they like to hear from and know that they should be engaging as part of these solutions. There's a lot of policy options being discussed on the Hill right now, and that level of influence could make a difference. And at another level as well, I like to say that consumers vote with their dollar every single day. Mm-hmm. So choosing packaging that is recyclable, looking and selecting materials or packages that maybe have less material and use recycled content, that's another huge indicator that these companies need to continue to embrace the circular economy and invest in these solutions, knowing that that's what people want.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for joining us today. We appreciate your thoughts, and we are looking forward to learning more about the Recycling Partnership as you continue to evolve.
Well, thanks for having me, and it's so great to see this level of engagement and that so many people are talking about this issue and trying to be part of the solution. So thanks for everything that you do.
Thank you. Well, folks, that was Sarah Dearman. She's the Vice President of Circular Ventures at the Recycling Partnership. You can learn more at recyclingpartnership.org. That's one word, recyclingpartnership.org. Check it out. Take the time to learn about your plastic use. Try to identify the right materials. Of course, Earth911 has a lot of information about how to do that, and we hope you'll share this show and pages on Earth911 with your friends who are confused or curious about plastic recycling. This is Earth911, Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and we will be back with another interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourselves, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.